Hey, what's up? BIGMOO here, and today I want to take you behind the scenes and show you the project file of my track Vibrations, my collab with Luca Testa. Firstly, a quick backstory on the track. So I started working on this track around about a year ago. I had the third drop sitting around as, an offcut from a previous project. And then one day my buddy Benny J, who collabed with me on Lost in Your Charade, sent me over this hardstyle melody that I really loved. That became the basis for the second drop that you hear in the track. So I built the rest of the track around that. I mixed it up, polished it, mastered it, and sent it over to Max Landry in LA. He did an incredible job writing and recording the vocals for the track. I, finished mixing it up, mastered it, and then from there, I sent it to Luca on Instagram. Now here's the interesting part. I didn't actually ask to collaborate. I only wanted Luca's feedback because we'd never spoken before at all. And I sent him a DM out of the blue and I was like, hey man, big fan of your stuff, loved your latest track. And then I was like, hey, feel free to tell me no. I've got this new track, it's a hardstyle track. I'd really love to get your opinion on it. If you have time, I'd really appreciate it. So he replied the next day and he sent me a message and he was like, hey man, really cool track. And then he actually said, hey, if you want, I can actually work on this for a little bit and then we can release it as a collab, Luca Testa and BIGMOO. And I was like, whoa, that would be really, really cool. And so he spent a couple days on it in the studio, added some percussion, some hardstyle effects, and that nasty rev bass that you hear in the first drop. And, I wake up to a WhatsApp message from him a couple months later, and he was like, hey man, Spinnin/Maxximize wants to sign the track. And I was like, whoa! That's been a huge goal of mine for such a long time. And here we are today. It is out now on Maxximize, October 30th. Make sure you go check it out. And without further ado, let's jump into the project. Okay, so welcome to the inside of the Vibrations project. You'll notice two things straight away, and that is that number one, holy shit, there's a lot of tracks. There's like 300 tracks in this project. Yeah, it's crazy. This shit took me like 4 months. There's way too many tracks. Okay, way too many tracks. Second thing you'll notice is that, wow, Sean, you're very, very organized. Look at all these colors. Usually my projects are a complete mess, but I had to bounce out stems for Luca. And so that's why this particular project is very organized. Don't worry, you'll never see this again. I'm going to start with the drop. Most importantly, the kick, because this is of course a hardstyle/hard dance track. Kick is kind of the most important part. When I play this, one of the first things you'll notice is that this drop doesn't sound exactly like the final version you hear in the track. Luca added a savage reverse bass sound in there, and I think he also boosted the punch of the kick quite a lot because it really just slams hard compared to the version that I had before. It's a different sound. I think he did a really good job with it, but this is what the original first drop sounded like. Also, another fun fact, this track actually used to be called Airborne and not Vibrations. Luca just renamed it one day after we got the vocals back from Max. But just to give you a bit of comparison, here you can hear the difference with Luca's version of the first drop. Really, really slams hard, as you can tell. Did a lot of work on the kick and the bass there. Also mastered the shit out of this track. It is super loud. So the kick is comprised, as you'll see, of a lot of layers. Probably way too many layers. There's like 10 different layers here that make up the kick. It's stupid, really. We have the punch, and then we have the bass. So this is how they sound. That's the punch, and this is the bass all together. And together they make up the kick. So to jump in, show you these one by one. This is the main punch of the kick, which we have at the top. That's providing the punch, quite self-explanatory. Then there's a bit of a hardstyle talk, to give it that typical hardstyle character that we want. And then a very simple top kick, just to increase the transient a little more, make it cut through the mix a little bit better. We then have this layer here, which is neither the punch or the tail. It's actually a complete hardstyle kick on its own. I've just removed the low end, so obviously it doesn't conflict with the sub that we already have. That in the second drop, as you'll see, is much louder, and that provides the distinct character that you hear of, typical hardstyle kick. Nice and dirty. Then in the sub, sort of tail part of the kick, we have this, which is all I really did to make this is I just found a bunch of big room and hardstyle kicks that I loved, and I just kind of EQ'd them to take up different parts of the frequency. So as you can see, this is the subtail. As you can see from the EQ over there, I just EQ'd off a bit of the highs and There's some wacky stuff around there, lowered around 500 and so on. And a bit of max bass as well to boost the, sort of upper sub. Hardstyle tail, this is kind of providing a bit of the character. A bit of that crunch. Top layer here as well, which is really providing a lot of that mid kind of drive that you hear. It sounds pretty empty without it, or pretty, I guess, weak without that. Put a limiter on there for some reason, I'm not really sure why. I think I wanted a consistent volume. Kick mids, again, providing more of that mid warmth, drive kind of energy. The crunch, which provides a lot of high end and, crunch. And then a second crunch layer, because, you can never have too many crunch layers. One's not enough, obviously. That one, I don't know if you can tell, is a lot more stereo. The other one's a bit more mono. So you get the full spectrum. And then one more, again, I think this is another complete hardstyle kick layered over the top of all of that. Just gave it a little bit of a fade in at the, actually no, I didn't. I should have faded it in to get out of the way of the transient of the punch kick, but yeah, it sounds good. It is good. So this just provides a little bit of extra energy and gives it that bit of edge that I felt was lacking after, only 9 or 10 layers. So there you have it. All up together, they sound like this. Moving right along. Drop 3 actually had a different kick and punch than drop 1 and 2 did. And the only difference really is that kick and bass and leads actually were all taken from the Afterlife. Fun fact, the third drop was actually an offcut from the Afterlife. I sent the Afterlife to Revealed and they rejected it. Maybe you can relate. They said the melody was too simple, so they asked me to change it. So I made this third drop as the other third drop for the Afterlife. Revealed still didn't want it, so I released the old drop as it was. That actually, I just found out, hit #1 in 8 different countries on the Apple Music hardcore/hard dance charts, which I think is really, really cool. But I had the third drop sitting around, and that became, as you know, how I started this track originally. So in the first drop, some other things that we have going on, of course, the main thing is going to be these big chord stab leads. I'll jump in and show you the break, where you can hear the leads more clearly. These are actually taken almost identically from my track Lost in Your Charade, my collab with Benny J featuring Natalie Major. They sound like this. Nice and beautiful. And as you'll see, there's way too many effects going on here on the left. My CPU did not like me when I was working on this project, but hey, it sounded good in the end, and so I left it. I'll show you each of the layers one by one. The main one that you hear that's providing that really high-end sparkle is this guy here. Really basic silent super saw patch. You'll notice I actually left the reverb on. I usually always turn the reverb off, and I turn the reverb off for all the other channels, but for this one here, it sounded really good, and that's kind of what provides the, if you listen in this first drop here, it provides a lot of that sparkly echo, the really wide reverb that you hear. Because as you'll know, signal flow, the reverb gets processed through all of these different saturators and really just gets like super crunchy. And so I'll turn it on and off so you can kind of hear the difference. This is without. See, it just kind of dies. The reverb's just it's not as powerful as if I leave this guy on. Yeah, it was kind of a mistake actually, but it just sounded really good, so I left it. See that high end sparkle? That kind of lingers. I think it sounds really cool. So I left that guy on there. Second layer that we have is over here. It's going to be the support chords. So these are missing a lot of the high end. I cut them off because that first layer covers all of the high end. It has so much high end. Added a sausage fattener, fatten things up a little bit. This giant saw layer is actually an octave below the other ones because it was kind of missing that mid-body warmth kind of range. So this really fills that section out. And as you'll notice, those are all playing chords. And then the last 2 layers that we have are going to be playing the leads. So there's 2 hardstyle leads playing at the same time. This one. I think I got that from Husman actually. So Husman, dude, shout out to you. You're a badass. And I think I tweaked it a tiny bit maybe. The other hardstyle lead is not in the break, but it is in the drop. So I'll play that for you now. That's what this one sounds like. Another silent. I think I use only silent for this whole project. And then this guy here as well, the pulse lead, it probably wasn't necessary, but I just felt it was lacking just a tiny bit of like warmth and presence. And so I added this 1 extra layer in the drop, really quiet and subtle. super subtle. You probably don't even hear the difference. The only other thing we have going on over here is in the second part of the second drop, we have this counter melody that plays kind of different notes of the chords just to make things a bit more interesting. And this one sounds like this. Yeah, it kind of sounds like shit by itself, but I think it adds a lot in the context of the whole track together. So they sound like this. Just not going to show you that. It's fine. Okay. The other really core part, of course, of the drop leads is going to be that big, shimmery, shiny reverb that you hear. Obviously, without the reverb, it's going to sound pretty dull and boring. We obviously need to glue all the leads together a little bit more and give them a lot of space. That's what makes it big and grand and open and epic, is that big reverb. Really simple Valhalla room. I think I copied Kashmir's Strange Lands leads that I saw in a tutorial ages ago, and I just increased the decay. I probably tweaked a bunch of other stuff too. Don't remember. The trick though, with getting the reverb to sound really huge and also at the same time really controlled, so the sound's really in your face and not just like really washy and in the distance, is something I've been trying to figure out how the hell to do for so long. I learned it from Husband, who learnt it from W&W. And basically what they do is they sidechain the reverb to not just the kick that's playing, but also to the leads themselves, right? Which you're probably aware of. It's a pretty common production technique. But the secret is, rather than sidechaining it with kickstart to duck and get out the way of the kick, or sidechaining it to the actual kick itself, is to have a sidechain signal that's really short. I chose the shortest hat that I could possibly find in the Kashmir pack, and I sidechained the reverb to that with really aggressive settings. So it really just ducks out of the way just of the transient and then comes right back up straight away. And that's how the lead sound can be right like in your face, but also sound huge and epic because the reverb wash, comes right up after the note is finished playing. Clicking on the reverb here, we have these two compressors. The other important and distinct element of the leads that I think make them pop and sound really cool and really different and a little bit unique is the chord structure themselves. So rather than just using a typical, 3-level chord thing that everyone else does, the chords are actually playing the first inversion of the G minor chord. So rather than like the normal G chord that you'd have here, if I show you what that sounds like. So normal G chord would sound like this. Still cool, nothing wrong with it at all, but I felt like it just sounded a bit plain or generic, and I wanted to make it a little bit more, edgy, spice it up a little bit. So I just took the top G notes and all I did is put them down an octave, and that becomes basically the first inversion of the chord, which then sounds like this. It just kind of has a bit of a different flavor to a normal G minor chord. And you'll notice I did exactly the same thing with the piano in the break, and pretty much every time I have chords in the track, they're always inverted. I'll show you here the piano as well. Which would otherwise sound like this if they were normal. Still cool, but just a bit generic and a bit happy. These I just felt sounded a lot more somber, and it set a bit of a different tone and a different mood, which I wanted to go for this track. Last up on the leads, of course, we have that giant effect chain. So, explaining this one by one, here we go. So without any of the effects at all, the leads sound super boring. Yeah, not very exciting. So, turning this on one by one, basically what we have going on here is OTT, just to glue everything together a little bit. This saturation with this very saturated O preset that I love really adds a lot of high end, a lot of energy, a lot of sparkle. Really brightens things up quite a lot. A multiband just ducking and taming some of those highs that we added before. The glue just glues everything together, kind of takes all of the leads and really makes it sound like one sound, as the name suggests, it glues together all of the different sounds. An EQ, getting rid of the low end that was added from the distortion and a little bit of the high end as well. This thing I only turned on in the first drop to make the transient a lot more punchy in those chord stabs. I didn't want it on for the rest of the track, but it is there in the beginning. Then we have a trick that I learned from Golden Army in one of his Dharma tutorials on YouTube, which is just using ozone to basically compress only the mids and leave the highs, and that just really helps the sides really stand out. It just kind of makes everything sound way bigger. Compress the mids and you boost the high end on the sides only, which I'll show you in a sec. Did that somewhere down here, this channel EQ here. As you'll see, it's here, side only. It's cutting the lows, cutting some of the mids, and really adding a lot to the highs there. And that's really what kind of, between that and compressing the mids only, is really what really just makes the whole thing sound a lot bigger. I'll show you the difference. So this is everything except for the mid compression and the stereo boost on the highs. So this sounds really good, but it's just not quite as big and epic and open, that, you know, that huge festival, hands in the air sort of sound that you want. When you add the mid compression and the slight stereo boost on the sides, it just adds so much. It's pretty subtle, but you do definitely hear the difference. Moving on to the rest of the plugins. So this LFO tool here, plus the tremolo, if I turn that guy on, is what is creating that really cool effect that you hear midway through the second drop, where the leads kind of go side to side really fast, and it's kind of like a trans gate, and also sending it left to right, automated to increase. There's a shitload of automation in this project. The rate from a fourth to 1/64th, so it gives the impression it's getting faster really quickly. The tremolo depth goes up, which just means you hear it more, you know, more hard pan to the left and the right. The highs are taken away a little bit, the lows are taken away a little bit, and altogether, that's what this sounds like here. Just makes things a bit more interesting and, you know, switches it up a little bit. Moving on, we have the compressor, of course, sidechaining the leads to the kick. It's quite important in hardstyle. You want that savage kick to really cut through. And the way we do that, again, is by sidechaining the leads to the sidechain signal, rather than using kickstart, rather than sidechaining it to the actual kick itself. Sidechaining it to that really, really short, tiny little hat really gets it out of the way of the transient, but the leads are still there, present, and very much in your face. Sound shift, this I just did a bit of pitching, you know, to kind of slide the end of the note down. Kind of like a slowdown kind of effect. Also, if you go down here in the actual MIDI notes themselves, I've turned on pitch bend here, and it does the same thing on the end of the note to kind of make it slide, give it a bit of movement. And also at various points throughout the drop, I added really subtle, really fast, you know, the pitch goes up or the pitch goes down really quickly. So the start and the end of the notes move, and just makes it more interesting. So you can hear right there, it's kind of, the pitch is really quickly going up and down. It's like, bwam, bwam, bwam. And it actually sounds pretty shit by itself. It sounds kind of out of tune, but because that's only one layer out of 6, and they're not all doing that, only a few of them are, it sounds really good as a whole. It makes the whole thing a bit more interesting. Rest of the effects we have on the leads, a bit of good old ozone, boosting the stereo width, not too much, just a little bit. It was already pretty wide. Also, maximizing it / limiting it, and then the dynamics as well. So it's compressing the leads, it's limiting them a tiny bit in certain parts of the track, and then boosting those sides just a little bit. One final EQ, again, that I showed you before, that's the one for the sides, and then the gain, just to control it at certain points throughout the track. And then at certain points, what I like to do as well for effect is, because this layer here has the reverb, even if you cut the reverb out, it's not going to cut out this reverb here from Silent itself. And so what I like to do to create kind of dramatic effect moving between different parts of the drop is to cut out all the reverb. And so kind of everything comes right to the front, right in your face. And then when that kick hits again and the leads come back in, then it explodes back out again into the stereo field. It's just like that cut. It's like the calm before the storm. It kind of just creates a bit more tension and makes the next part of the drop slam and come in even harder. And that's everything for the leads. All right, so going back to the first drop, some other effects and different sounds and things that we have going on in here. Obviously the kick and the chord leads make up the majority of what you hear, but if it was just those two alone, it would be pretty boring. And so I had to add a bunch of little hardstyle effects and sweeps and glitches and little sounds that you hear, or you might not even notice in the track, but you'll notice them after this. So there you go, that's cool. Little sound like that, I feel gives the track a bit of extra drive, a bit of extra groove on some of the notes. Very basic crashes, cymbal crashes, sweeps, nothing super crazy or exciting there. Some crowd noise as well, of course. The reverse reverb here as well. This is kind of, I think, a really important part of the first drop, is I bounced out the big chord reverb leads, reversed them, and then put them right before the actual note hits, and it sucks. You'll hear it kind of sucks the note in, you know, rather than just being like boom, it's like boom. And it kind of just sucks in on, you know, certain notes and adds quite a lot of movement, if that makes sense. Other things that I have going on, there's of course some rises right towards the end. As you can see, the original first drop used to be 3 lots of 8 bars. It was 24 bars in total. Luca cut it down. Some very basic rises right towards the end. Another one here. That one's pretty cool, adds a lot of energy. This one as well. Kind of adds a lot of hype moving into the next section of the drop. And then this classic one from Hardwell from a pack like 5 years ago or something. You know, altogether, just make sure the track is kind of continuously evolving, continuously moving, and never stagnant and boring, in my opinion. You might disagree, but that's okay. More effects. There's a lot of effects in this track. So particularly as the drop evolves, I like to add more and more effects to switch it up, keep it interesting. So we have a bunch of hardstyle effects here that you'll hear. Another synth loop here, a screechy kind of effect. Adds quite a lot. Another suck, that's kind of doing the same thing as the big reverse reverb leads that you heard before. A reverse hardstyle kick as part of the fill to kind of suck you into the second part of the drop. It sounds like this. So it's like, whoa-bang, you know what I mean? Some more snares, you know, pretty typical snares, claps, nothing super crazy there. Another big snare, some drum fills, a bell, some more hardstyle glitches and effects. Couple more, because you can never have too many hardstyle effects. I really love that one. I added a shitload of reverb, actually a second reverb bus. It's a bus that I used in the Afterlife as well. It's just a massive, like 10-second reverb to really just add a lot of space and reverb in there. And of course, you have to sidechain the reverb to get out of the way of the kick. Another effect. A brass stab that I loved and I thought fitted the track pretty well. Adds a nice bit of tension moving into the second part of the track, and then a nice sweep. And some final parts that constitute this massively complicated fill. Sounds really, really dirty and adds quite a lot. So altogether, we have like 20 sounds here to make up this fill. Some more claps and water drops and kicks and little things that make up another, different fill. I always like combining a bunch of different samples to kind of make my own fills rather than just copying the ones from like the Cashmere pack that everyone already has. So all of these different sounds and effects and stuff like that sound like this together. You see a nice delay on that laser sound, so it echoes out as the drop continues to play. Another little cheeky sigh effect that I think adds quite a lot. Little sweep adds a lot of movement, same with this thing here. It's a good way to lead into the next part of the drop. A few more hardstyle effects that I didn't talk about yet. A little scream and a woo! And then this hardstyle fill as well. Which I really, really like. I think it adds so much energy in the track. As you can see here, if you know how Logic works, basically what I did is there's a feature called speed up and slow down, which is kind of like a tape stop, except speed up is like a reverse tape stop. So it starts from 0 and goes to, 100. Kind of like with the CDJ, if you press play when the knob is, towards the right, then it'll start up slowlier, more slowly. Yeah, you get the idea. Moving along, some more effects that I have going on in here. This one Respawn sent me, and I think it's really, really sick. That definitely adds a lot of energy and drive in the track. This big guy here that I call the whale, because it kind of sounds like a whale a little bit, in my opinion. Use your imagination. Okay, use your imagination. The Ferretto screech here, this is from a sample pack as well. Which I like, combining those all together. Gives a cool effect. And then this one here, this is pretty cheeky. So I really like Maddix's song, The Omen, and there's a fill in there which I absolutely love. It sounds a little bit like this. It's the one that goes beep, beep. And I could not figure out for the life of me how the hell to make it. So I may or may not have just ripped it from his track and just threw it in my own project. I tried to put as much like EQ and panning effects and some effect rack stuff as well to, not to blatantly rip it off. Try to make it my own a little bit, but it's one of many layers, and so I think that's okay. Maddix, if you see this, I'm sorry. I love your music. You're fantastic. Let's continue. That one there, and then the screech from Ollie as well. Together, I actually I probably spent an hour getting this fill right. It was ridiculous. I don't know why, I just couldn't get it to sound right. But I got there in the end. Still sounds horrible, but it sounds good in the track, which is the most important part. It's pretty quiet, honestly. You don't really hear it that much. There's a couple other things. We've got a lead enhancer here, which is just kind of like a drone. Kind of like that sound you hear in Burn. It's kind of like a Hoover, just adds a bit of energy, bit more tension, bit more movement and whatnot. Some other effects that I have going on, I actually have some brass stabs, which I almost guarantee you can't even hear in the track. I don't know why I bothered. Very, very quiet, but you know, they'll add a little bit of energy, I'm sure. A few more effects that I haven't covered yet. Had to throw in some haze towards the end, you know. Just gives a bit more movement, energy, drive. I like to add a human element wherever possible. Of course, the track has vocals. But just adding little things like that give it a lot more energy. So all in all, that is how the first drop was made. Sounds like this all together. Before Luca, of course, came and worked his magic on it. Moving right along, I may as well talk about the second drop while we're on the subject of drops, and then I'll talk about the break afterwards. So, the epic hardstyle drop. Really, really love this one. I think it's really emotional, but also powerful, and just a really, really, really nice melody. Shout out to Ben, by the way, Benny J, who sent me this, the original version of this melody that you hear. He's a tech house producer. Really, really good. You should look him up. But he didn't have much need for the hardstyle melody, so sent it over to me, and that's what became the basis for the second drop. So pretty much everything is identical to the first drop, apart from the only thing that's significantly different is this layer here is a lot louder in the hardstyle drop, and that's of course what gives the hardstyle kick its hardstyle character. How many times can Sean say hardstyle in 30 seconds? Sounds like that, and then all of the layers together are gonna sound like this. So, as you'll notice, the notes and the different kicks change notes as they play. It's not just one note the whole time. I probably spent like 2 hours trying to get this right. I was pitching it in Logic using Logic's native pitcher. You know, if you go to here and you just go up there, you can go transpose and you can, you know, go up 3 semitones or whatever to be in a different key. The algorithm's not the best though, and especially for a kick, you really need the pitch to be perfect. Like, it has to sound good in every key. It can't sound sloppy and weak, because then your drop is just not as powerful. It just kind of sounds like shit. And so I remember watching a tutorial from Headhunters about 3 years ago on how he pitched his hardstyle kicks, and he actually uses Adobe Audition because it has a much better pitching algorithm. And so I literally went and bought Adobe Audition. I bought a subscription to like Adobe Cloud plan or whatever. So I got Audition and I used that to pitch all of the different kicks. So I had to bounce every single layer individually because some of them sounded better in Audition, and then some of them, like the sub, I think, actually sounded better when I pitched it in Logic. And yeah, this one here, the hardstyle tail. So I pitched it in Logic and not Audition because it sounded better. The Audition one didn't sound good, but I had to basically pitch every single layer by itself. It was a bit of a pain in the ass, but we got there in the end. And luckily, this main kick here was from a pack that actually had the same kick in every single key, which makes life really easy. So that was taken care of for me, which was really cool. One more thing as well, I like to put little slowdowns here on certain notes, certain kicks. So then, you know, rather than just being boom, 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 fall to the floor the whole time, it adds a bit of movement, pretty subtle, but it adds like a nice slowdown effect, which just switches things up. So you'll notice the note goes towards the end here. So that's it for the kick in the second drop. It's pretty much the same. Most of the effects and sweeps and different things are the same. Obviously, you know, I took out certain effects where they didn't fit because the second drop needs to be a lot more euphoric, a lot more hands in the air, a lot more, you know, emotional compared to the first drop. It's a lot more just a conglomeration of different effects and shit. So yeah, took out some of them, added some different ones. The leads, of course, I already explained them from the break. They're exactly the same leads. And that's the second drop. Moving right along to the third and final drop, the beast, the big finisher. So, the third drop. Oh, my goodness, the third drop. My opinion, I think Luca did a fantastic job on the track. When he mastered it, it is so loud. In my opinion, don't tell Luca, but I really do think the third drop in the final version of the track that you hear is just way too overcompressed and just sounds so squashed compared to the original version that I had. I just think it was mastered too much, you know, too compressed and too limited. What can you do? right? I talked to Tom, Blasterjax about it. They liked the way it sounded. Luca liked the way it sounded. The label liked it, and everyone liked it. And so, you know, whatever, right? It's their decision at the end of the day. But this is how my original third drop sounded. This drop, as I already said before, the kick and the leads were taken from the Afterlife because it was already an offcut from the Afterlife. So I can go ahead and explain that in a different video. I'm not going to explain it how I made it here, but this is how the kick and the bass sound for the third drop. I tried using the same kick and bass as I did in the first two drops, but it just didn't fit the leads. It just didn't sound right. The kick sounds a lot worse by itself, but it really does work with the leads, in my opinion, to make it really strong and powerful. So you have the punch here. Really strong, really sturdy punch. It's really, really important to really cut through. And the bass itself, 3 layers, really simple. We got a sub, a big fat sub, this drop bass low, which I believe is actually taken from Respawn and Ollie James's track Alarm. They use the same preset as Respawn told me. And then another, you know, mid layer adding some warmth as well. So we got that one. We got this guy. And the sub. Altogether, the bass actually sounds a bit underwhelming, a bit weak, but I think it works in the context of everything together. They sound like this. So moving on to the drop leads in the third drop, I can't show you exactly how I made them because I bounced them out to audio. One, because the CPU was choking and dying, and also because I had to bounce them out to audio to have this one sound here, you'll notice, is sent to a really, really big reverb channel. And all of the other settings by themselves, all of the other layers, actually have reverb directly on the channel, which is something I hardly ever do. Like Valhalla Room, really, really short, directly on the channel itself, only like less than 2 seconds. This one, for some reason, has 2. I really have no idea why. But, you know, fuck it. This one here, though, is you'll see it's sent to the big reverb, which really adds a lot of energy and presence, and that's the main one that you hear. You hear the big wash of reverb come out at the end. There was a lot of effects on here before that I had to bounce to audio. I can maybe show you them in a different project if I do that for the Afterlife. This lead here. Real nasty tremor vibes. Same deal with this one here. You'll notice one's panned a bit more to the left, this one's panned a bit more to the right. This Arabic lead here, made it in Serum just to give it a bit of ethnic kind of flavor. Yeah, and some effects as well, as you hear there at the end, that I made with Effectrix. I think I used a phaser and I just automated the dry wet of the phaser to increase at the end, so it kind of gives a bit of movement and a bit of variation. Also went down an octave as well, as you can hear. And I did different effects and glitches like that for all of the different layers at various points throughout the drop to add a bit more variation. This one here from Revealed, it was a Spire preset. This one drove me crazy because the synth itself would keep changing to some weird ass, annoying, like really like drill sound. It was horrible. That's what I was dealing with making this project. So I had to bounce that one up to audio because it was just driving me crazy. That's what that one sounds like. And then just a little hypersaw that comes in on certain notes towards the end. Just to add a bit of an accent, add a bit of flavor. There we go. So those are all the leads together. In terms of effects on the leads right here in the third drop, without any effects, it sounds like this. It sounds kind of horrible. It's like all just they're all kind of fighting for the same frequency range, which I really should have handled by EQing each of the individual leads a bit better. But hey, it sounds good in the end. The glue to glue them all together and compress all of the leads as one. This EQ here, getting rid of a bit of that mud that you hear, boosting the mids a little bit. An OTT to really give it a bit more drive and crunch and glue things together a bit more. My good old favorite, Satin Saturator, adding a lot of high-end presence and energy there. Same deal again. An EQ, this one's set to only be the sides, ducking the mids and really boosting the sides there. And the Imager really boosting the sides in the higher frequency bands as well. So that's adding a lot of the stereo imaging that you hear. The compressor for sidechain, of course. Gain, this is just to control it in the build and stuff like that. Endless Smile, I use that actually as an effect. In the build up, I also used it on the master. I don't know why I'd used it on both, but it sounded good. And this guy here, which actually adds a lot to what you can hear in the final leads. I actually added this to the chord leads as well in a post processing version of the project where I bounced everything to stems. But this adds a lot of high end and a lot of really nice presence and really makes the leads overall sound really in your face. So this is without it. Still sound pretty good, but this just kind of takes it to the next level. Just adding that bit of extra high crunch. Same deal again with the rest of the third drop. There's nothing that crazy going on. All of the effects are pretty much copied from the first two drops. There's nothing that unique happening. There might be a couple other different effects and fills in here that you don't hear in the first drop, but really there's nothing too much going on. Cool. So moving on to the rest of the track. Only things we have left: intro, outro, build, and the break. Nothing really obviously that exciting happening in the intro that I haven't already explained from the drop. The only other thing that I haven't mentioned is pretty much this little ARP that we have here, which is comprised of actually 4 different layers. There's that guy, a nice little clicky ARP, the ARP drone, Ollie James, and then this one here as well, which is obviously the main one that you hear. There's also this little ARP fill that I really love. That adds a lot of movement going into the second part of the intro where the bass comes in. And then this ARP epic, which I really love, adds a lot of energy. That's what they sound like all together. Realistically, I probably should have muted these two. Maybe it's a bit too busy, but overall I think it sounds pretty cool. One other additional effect, which I think sounds really, really cool, that you hear in the intro and the outro is going to be these vocal chops that I took from Max's vocal. I think Max did an incredible job with the vocals that you hear in the track. I'll explain how I process those in a little bit. One key part of the intro that you can hear is of course the vocal chop. That all I did is I took the word cheap from cheap poison in the water and I just, looped it. Added a lot of effects that you hear. So without it, they sound like this. Melodyne, just to make sure it's in key. Nectar 3, I just use like the auto settings where it kind of does what it thinks the vocals need. A bit of EQing and compression. Pretty simple stuff. EQ just to cut the low end. Most of the interesting part that you hear comes from this wow filter. It's automated to increase as the intro continues on to make it evolve and become more interesting over time. Then it becomes really weird and not actually sounding like a vocal at all. Bit of bit crusher that I think I automated at some stage later on. OTT, just to compress his vocals even more. This LFO tool here, just adding a little bit of that trance gate that you hear to chop things up, make them a bit more interesting. The shaper box kind of doing the same thing, but with a different pattern. So that's over a longer period. That one's over like 2 bars, whereas the LFO tool's only over 1 bar. So it kind of creates a longer 2-bar pattern instead of a 1-bar pattern, which makes things a bit more interesting. Kickstart, of course, is sidechain it to the kick, and then gain just to control it over time, because when the wow filter comes in, it gets really quite loud. And so I want to turn it down. One really, really cool little vocal effect that I made as well, or at least I think it sounds really cool. You hear it halfway through the first build-up. And that sounds like this. So it's a combination of this lead vocal, which I think I synthesized or vocoded at some stage, and I don't even remember what I did anymore. Bounced it out to audio, and then this thing as well, which was created and then bounced out to audio. They together sound like this. I think it sounds pretty cool. Basically turned his vocals into like a Dalek or something. It just helps make the first build a bit more interesting rather than just being like the snare drum playing, on the quarter note, which is not that exciting. This adds a bit of movement, bit of energy, makes things a bit more exciting. And adding that nice pause here, taking out everything, taking out the drums, taking out the vocals, and then you can hear his vocals come in for the first time. It really adds a lot of energy and presence, and it's like that pause, and then boom, straight back into the second part of the build where things really start to ramp up. And that's what this sounds like right here. And to keep that note going, because as far as I know, Max can't hold a note for that long, it's very hard. I just basically chopped it, looped it, and then cross-faded it to try and make it sound like one long note. And then, of course, pitched it up at the end just to give it a lot of energy and everything's rising towards the big first drop. Some other effects and things we have going on in the build. Firstly, of course, the big snares that you hear. I also added some of the drop bass from the first drop to kind of seed and prepare you for the big first drop that happens. So just a bit of the kick tail, not so much the punch. With really filtered down, and the filter expands and opens up as the build continues. Of course, we have the snare drums coming in. Starts off with... Got this one guy from Ollie James, same with this one here. Two snare layers there together, nothing super crazy. More sweeps, effects, I don't really need to talk about those, they're not that exciting. Right before the drop, you hear, of course, the big pause, the big silence, and then you hear these reverses, and then the drop comes in, and it sounds like this. So those layers, all they are, very, very simple. I took this sample from Jonas Aiden's pack, shout out Jonas Aiden, that he used in his track with Brooks, with a tremolo on it that automates, again, that same effect that I showed you with the chords to make it oscillate left and right. Like that, which you'll hear if you're wearing headphones. Another effect from right, and then I took the chords, bounced them out, and reversed them as I showed you before. That kind of creates a lot of tension and energy right before that first kick comes in and slams. Of course, what would be a build without some rises? So I have, a good few amount of rises going on here. With this, start up and a slow down at the end. This one here, pretty basic riser. Another one. Very quiet. Subriser, which is adding a lot of that low energy. The build kind of sounds a little bit empty, especially if you're in a club or a festival or something like that. You'll really feel that energy in the build, and it'll make the whole thing a lot more powerful. More rises. Another one from my boy Husband in his track Epidemic. I love this one. Mad King riser. This guy here, which really adds a lot of energy. This one down here. Big fat dirty saw. And one final one down here. And then of course we have the siren, which is on loop, adding a lot of energy in the build. Filter opens up as the build continues on, as you hear. And then it pitches up just like everything else. Those are all the rises. A few impacts as well in the build, I think add a lot of energy. Adding a bit more energy as well. It's a very, very soft ambience that I've taken from the break. A little jungle sound, this little breathing sound here, which I think is cool. Adds a nice bit of energy and human element going into the first build. Layered with that one as well. Moving along into the second break, which in my opinion, I spent quite a lot of time on it, as I did with everything else in this track. So I'll explain that one top to bottom. This is kind of the beautiful melodic breakdown, the melodic section of the track. Apart from all the sweeps and effects and things that I've already shown you, the main things that you hear in the break are going to be the pianos, of course, and the break elements. Piano, very simple. Contact piano. I used Alicia's keys because I love it. I think it sounds amazing. That same SPL Vitalizer that I showed you before adds a lot of sparkle and high end, which sounds really good. And then the other things that we have as well is a lot of plucks and different pads and things going on in the break that come in over time to create an evolving sort of landscape. Those being little flute that you hear here. Very, very quiet in the background. Of course, the big Reese bass providing that low end underneath everything, which later on plays different notes instead of just the same drone note, which is just playing the bottom note of the chord. Very typical. Some other things, I've had these choir layers here kind of as pads. Make the whole thing a bit more angelic, I suppose. Moving on. Continuing the choir theme, I've got these choir kind of plucks that add a bit of a voice to support the main pluck that you hear right here that I made in silent. Really, really cool pluck. I really love it. It's kind of distinctive, a little bit unique, and I think it sounds really good. Typical sort of old school progressive house, kind of like, think, 2014 Hardwell kind of, vibe. I like to bring in the plucks slowly over time, as they did back in the golden days of EDM. And there's 2 different layers playing those. One a bit lower, one a bit higher. And then these, which are basically, chord stabs that come in over time rather than plucks. The release time, the decay time is just longer on these guys. Made in silent as well, of course. Couple more things, some bass stabs to support the chords, because I felt between the respace and just the plucks, there's kind of a mid layer of bass missing, and that's filled up by this instrument here. And this one as well, which comes in the second half of the break. Really similar sound, maybe it wasn't necessary. And then finally, the good old hard style mid bass. And that changes notes later on. Add a bit of groove, add a bit of drive, add a bit of movement, a bit of rhythm, and then this weird ass sound, which I don't even think you hear it in the track, but I thought it was cool. Just kind of supports the bass. Yeah, it's weird. A pad as well. Chords are also inverted, just like all of the other chords. This one was actually taken from my track Lost in Your Charade. I just reused it because it sounded good. And then, of course, some ambience. Very basic sort of cave dripping noises, just to add a bit of eeriness. I like to add these sounds, because without it, the whole thing sounds a little bit too happy clappy and, a bit like a nursery rhyme, I guess. So you want to add a few darker sounds to kind of offset the happiness, I suppose. Really dark and sinister. So yeah, there's just a bunch of those different sounds and stuff going on here. Some jungle sounds, because why not? Adds a bit of life to the track. Thunder, again, it kind of helps to add the dark element to it. Some rain as well in the first half. I took out in the second half because I felt a bit too busy. And then a nice little violin note from Jonas Aiden. I forgot what it's called. I think it's called a pipe or something like that, when you have one long violin drone note that adds a nice bit of tension as well. All of which, of course, support the vocals. Originally, 150 BPM was actually too fast for this section, and Max couldn't sing it fast enough. It didn't sound right. And so we actually automated the tempo to go down to 140 for this particular part, and then back up to 150 in the second half of the break over here in the chorus. But when I sent Luca the stems, as you can imagine if you've ever worked with stems, the second half of the project was a mess, because the first half was all in time, it was right on the grid, and then the second half of the project didn't match up to the grid, and so it was impossible for him to work on it and add more layers with the tempo change. So I had to change it back to 150 and then manually sort of move everything around afterwards. So that was fun. Let's talk about these vocals. I think Max did such a good job with these. If I take off all the effects, this is basically, you'll hear raw what he sent me. Cheap poison in the water. I think I might have already processed these somewhere. Fake air inside my lungs. Yeah, I think I processed these in a different project, but I didn't do that much crazy stuff. It was basically just EQing it a little bit, adding a bit of compression, nothing too crazy. And then this stuff here is really just to boost it, add that nice little sparkling high end, a bit more saturation to make them a bit more powerful. Cutting off the low end. I really like this plugin from Waves. It's kind of based on an analog, the Poltec plugin, to add a bit of presence in the mid-range and also the high end. And for some reason, I love this plugin so much, I used it twice on the vocals. And that's what makes it sound like this. Cheap poison in the water. You can see it has a bit more edge than what it did before. So it does sound a bit more distorted and not that good by itself, but in the context of the mix, it really helps them cut through and sound better. And of course, we have the reverb and delay that really add a lot of space and depth. Cheap poison in the water. Fake air inside my lungs. Automated the delay to come up and really fill the gaps when the vocal's not playing. I did that one with a sidechain, so basically sidechain the delay and the reverb to the vocals, and then also just a bit of automation on this bus here, really boosting the volume in the gaps and really bringing it back when the vocals are playing. Also see here, I have this Demon Vocals layer, which is just a really low, sinister, just an octave down, really accentuates certain notes. Quick thrills made by
designers.
Here we go, second half of the track. Before I like to throw them straight into a compressor, I like to get the volume of each note and syllable and each word pretty much similar, so the compressor doesn't have to work too hard. And that's what I did here by chopping them up, boosting certain volumes, cutting certain volumes, and so on. So without anything on them, the second verse sounds like this.
I feel it moving my blood, my body is resting.
Melodyne, Max is pretty much already bang on key. Just wanted to make sure that everything was right where it should be. So the Melodyne's not really doing that much, to be honest. Again, same processing chain as before with Nectar 3. CLA 2A, which I really love for vocals. I learned this trick from Kashmir.
I feel it moving my blood.
Is to use basically two different compressors on the vocals so that one compressor doesn't have to work too hard by itself.
I feel it moving my blood, my body.
And this guy here, the Renaissance Vox, you can actually get away with a lot of compression and it still sounds really good and really natural. A bit of gain, which I automated, and then the Camel Crusher, just to provide a bit more grit, a bit more energy, especially for the chorus. You can hear the intensity of the way that he's singing. I wanted to match that.
I feel it moving my blood, my body is restless and resonating. This light
Adds a bit more drive to the whole thing. Of course, we have some other vocal layers here as well. So these are basically panned hard left and hard right, playing the same note.
I feel it moving my blood, my body is restless and resonating.
So they're playing the same notes, but just, different takes of the same notes make the whole thing a bit more stereo. It's kind of like the same as adding a chorus effect. And then, of course, we have the harmonies, which in my opinion, I probably could have made louder in the track to stand out, but they sound like this.
Is all the rhythm in my gut, the driving force inside.
And then these are the harmonies right here.
The rhythm in my gut, the driving force inside my veins.
And all together, vocals sound like this.
The rhythm in my gut, the driving force inside my veins.
Which are, really, really special. Max did a really good job with these. That's pretty much it for the second break. The only other part that I haven't talked about yet is after the second break, there is kind of a pre-build before the main second build, which I think Luca actually cut out in the end, so you don't even hear this in the final track, but this is what it used to sound like. And of course, then the second build comes in. It's pretty much the same as the first build, same rises, same drums. Obviously, we want to automate the hardstyle leads to come in. We want to filter them in slowly. So, we can let the listener know what's about to come without surprising them too much in the second drop, because it's a different melody than what we had already in the break. And then finally, the build from the second drop into the third drop, which I believe, again, used to be 16 bars. Luca shortened it again to 8 bars. I think that's one thing he did pretty well, is sort of diagnosing which parts of the track weren't strictly necessary, cutting them out to make the whole thing as short as possible. Still getting the message across, but without waffling on for too long, I guess, because the original track was about 5 minutes, which is... in 2020, people have such ADD that, we know songs are getting shorter, tracks are getting shorter. All the labels want to release songs that are like 2 or 3 minutes because they can get, more streams on Spotify in a shorter amount of time and whatever. People just have a shorter attention span nowadays. So, that's why we cut those. Well, that's why he cut those parts out. And all we really do in this part here is keeping some of the break effects that we had before while keeping some of the rises of the build. And then also seeding the third drop leads. And of course, getting some of the kick and bass in there as well to really prepare you for that big final drop that comes in and just slams. You get the gist, right? You get the drill. Outro, basically the same as the intro, nothing super exciting or special happening there. It's just kind of the intro in reverse. And that's pretty much it. One final thing, a few effects on the master that are super, super typical for EDM. I have a gain that I automate moving right into the drop to make the whole thing hit a lot harder. You can see there, right before every single drop, I automate the gain to drop by quite a lot. And then that makes the drops hit a lot harder. Also automating the low cut, right? You want to remove some of the low end right before the drop. That's pretty typical stuff. Same with the high end, a tiny bit. That also, I feel, makes the chords hit a lot harder. Everything kind of just explodes. It gets like sort of close really into the middle. The stereo field gets lowered. The low end, is reduced. The high end's reduced. The volume goes down. Everything kind of contracts and then boom, really explodes. That's what makes the drop hit really hard. Same again with the stereo width of the track. This is nothing crazy, nothing new, and a bit of endless smile as well to create that, big reverby, delay, sort of pitchy build-up effect, just to amplify everything a little bit more. So from here, from this project to the very final version that you hear, I bounced these out to stems. I mixed them a tiny bit in terms of volume, maybe adding a bit more EQ to each stem, saturation, and so on and so forth. Sent all of those stems over to Luca. He worked his magic. He added that crazy rev bass that you hear in the first drop, some drums, some percussion, some more hardstyle effects, like a hardstyle kick in the break and so on and so forth. Then he would have, mixed it and mastered it from his end. I don't know who mastered the track, but they did a hell of a job. It came out super, super loud. This track is really loud. And then from there, that turned into the final track that you hear today. So that'll conclude how I made my track Vibrations with Luca Testa. I hope you got a lot out of that. I hope you learned some cool new things. If you haven't already checked out the track, please go check it out. It's out now everywhere, October 30th on Spinnin/Maxximize. Go give the track a listen, go show it some love, and let me know what you think as well in the comments. Hope this is valuable. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you very, very soon.
Vibrations. Vibration. Bum, 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 ba, da, 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 da.